to take 3 at a time.
Thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. If we're thinking towards 2027, I'm not sure whether I heard anything about what might be really different from what's currently happening. It might sort of increase in terms of the little things that make a difference. But I just wondered whether there's going to be any more transformation in social media and other ways.
Yes.
Thank you for that. That was a really great talk. I was just wondering, in your discussion of democracy and whether social media is dooming democracy, when you take Facebook, for instance, we know have conducted experiments to see how they can affect voter turnout, and that they basically said, we can do it, but we don't really know, we don't have the data, as you said, to analyse that. We know they've conducted mood experiments that can affect how people engage with their friends and news sources, all that kind of thing. Is there anything we can do to stop, basically, Facebook and similar platforms from entirely controlling democracy in that kind of way?
You outlined a number of advantages for people on low incomes if they can do all kinds of different things online, and I agree that those are advantages. I don't know what proportion of the population in that situation would not be able to make use of that opportunity because they have difficulty getting access. I know they can use libraries. They may not have the skills and the confidence. And 2 examples where I believe there are big problems at the moment. I heard a man on the radio talking about the fact that the job centre expected him to have evidence that he had been applying for jobs, and he had indeed written down everything he'd been doing, but that didn't count. It had to be online. And I believe also that to apply for universal credit, you have to do it online, again, which some people can't do, and some are even illiterate. So I think those are problems that need to be thought about as well.
Great. So thanks.
The Facebook experiments one, I mean, yes, all organisations do experiments with digital platforms, do experiments all the time. They call it A/B testing. They have one version, then another, and they see which one you like. So, I mean, the huge kind of moral panic there was when Facebook actually announced that they'd done an experiment, you know, the emotional contagion one, which incidentally was a very bad experiment. In fact, I teach a little course on experimental methods at Oxford, and we use that as an example of how not to run an experiment because it's so bad. But the trouble was that there was so much criticism of that, of something which they do all the time anyway. All organisations do it, all commercial organisations do it, that they became even more reluctant to publish research at all. And I think we've got to try and move away from that and in some senses have a more kind of a collaborative, I mean, sounds like a collaborator, I sound like the Dane now, but relationship in order to kind of work with them. I mean, I think that they should be working with researchers and working with governments to kind of open up, to make their procedures more transparent, because that's the kind of worst of it. We just don't know what they're doing. There's a huge push at the moment with regard to political advertising, which they will know about. And I mean, I think there is some hope there because Facebook, politics is a tiny bit of what Facebook do. They're basically about keeping you with your eyes on that screen. And politics, for example, in the last election, we do have some data for this from the organisation Who Targets Me. In the last UK election, in the last 24 hours of the campaign, so that's when you would expect the parties were pumping everything into Facebook advertising. 3% of all the advertising in the country was political. You know, just 3%. So it's not what Facebook really care about, and therefore I think that it should be possible, keeping up the pressure to get more transparency in things like political advertising. They have announced some modicum of transparency in advertising already, but I think that we might have a toe, we really could have a toe in the door there. And we've noticed in our relations with Facebook that they are starting to be more sort of open to the idea of working with researchers. So, I mean, I think there are some possibilities there, but I mean, you know, that is being, I mean, I think there's got to be some sort of multi-level response to this from all over the place. It's got to be, you know, people putting up pressure, kind of crowdsourcing, fact-checking, and that kind of thing. The state's got to have a role of some kind of. I mean, at the moment, the British government's reaction has been, you know, like we'll close WhatsApp. You know, that is not going to work. We can't just forget we know about encryption. You know, I mean, it's just bonkers. So I think there are things that can be done. But in answer to your question, I mean, I think that's where the trends, well, I certainly think it's where the trends should be. You know, we've got to catch up. This has happened so quickly. You know, it has really, I'd say 5 years that these platforms have been so intertwined in political systems. They were predicted, we were talking about the YouTube election, etc., but we didn't really have it until the last few years. And I think that kind of catch up, particularly in the ethics of machine learning, the ethics of algorithms, we're seeing a big shift. I mean, when you first started talking about ethics for companies, even 2 years ago, you get the response, ethics, yeah, what do you mean? There's a creepy line, isn't there? We don't want to cross the creepy line. What do you mean apart from a creepy line? And the creepy line would be like, you know, matching up your loyalty card data with your Facebook data or your Twitter data or something like that, you know. But you're seeing a much more nuanced, sophisticated sort of thinking about this now. And I think, yeah, I mean, I like to think that would be the space to watch. The digital exclusion point, I mean, of course, I have been talking about people who, I mean, I've been talking about people who are using the internet, and lots of people don't. But quite a few of the things I am talking about, I mean, people who don't use the internet are still exposed to digital platforms. Their data is still there in the digital platforms. And as a society, I think what we have got to work on is ensuring that, I think we've got a real danger of marginalisation now, as you say, and as we all saw so tragically in the film Danny Blake, for example, you know, this question of sort of you have to do online, what happens to the people who can't. And there is a complete, you know, moral responsibility of state organisations, for example, to provide that interface. And actually, all that they're saving by dealing with most people digitally, you know, can be put into putting more resources into treating people who can't use it offline. But it goes right through the whole kind of education system. And I mean, for example, at school, we largely try to stop children using the internet. Or make it so boring that they might never really want to later on. And we've got to change that. It may be more valuable to know how to maintain a LinkedIn account than it is to know how to write a CV. You know, we've got to think differently about skills, definitely.
Great. So in the middle, yes, there's one. Maybe this bit.
Yeah, so I kind of have a two-part question. The first one is, to me, it's obvious that the current political machine can't keep up with technology. So how do we kind of make an independent FDA for these organizations? Right? We can't take medications if they're not safe. Why are we allowed to take jobs away from people? That sort of thing. And then also related to that, how do you think we should make people aware of the risk-taking behavior of sharing their information? The beauty of machine learning is that it has latent variable detection, and you might have a hiring algorithm that won't hire somebody because they are not depressed now, but might be depressed in 5 years, and that person doesn't know that they're web scraping this information and being discriminated against. So how do you make people aware to balance these tiny social movements that they might be able to have versus, you know, the algorithmic bias?
Well, public understanding of the kind of issues involved is very important. I mentioned data ethics, and that's something we've been pushing, particularly at the Turing Institute, for some time now. And the Nuffield Foundation, I mean, I believe that there should be some kind of organisation like the Nuffield Council for Bioethics for data ethics. And there is now, I mean, the Nuffield Foundation, where the Nuffield Council for Bioethics is, has now agreed to fund, you know, the kind of discussion over the setting up of such a body. I mean, it's a convention, not a council. But so that is a move towards doing something like that. I mean, that's just one thing. It would have to, again, got to be completely multi-level. And they've got to be, I mean, we have to try and build educational kind of mechanisms. I mean, one thing is that I think what we'll have to do is kind of work with the grain of the way that social media platforms are designed, for example. I think, and I do think we're already beginning to see that. So if you take Snapchat, as I understand it, it's a kind of, I can't remember what it's called, a kind of, it's designed to be done socially. So nobody tells you how to use, it's really difficult actually, and my son refuses to be friends with me because it's not cool, obviously, the mother is a friend. You know, it's not easy for because it's designed so that somebody sort of shows you how to use it. And if that's the case, then I think that the kind of protections on people, you know, telling young people, for example, how to, what not to share and what not to do. I think you did see that actually. There was one point where Facebook was going to kind of import all the WhatsApp, everybody's WhatsApp personal details, right? And they were going to do it kind of by an opt-out. You know, you would have had to opt out. And there was a huge movement across platforms to say, you know, don't do it, which was really kind of effective. And I think we've got to kind of, it's a kind of virtual activism, if you like. And I think we've got to get used to the idea of trying to working out how to kick those things off and make them influential, because they can work. I think that was quite effective. So yes, but it's got to be completely multi-level. There's no one solution to this, of course. I mean, one thing I do think though that younger people are more privacy savvy than older people think they are. I do believe that, because, yeah, I think they're more aware of it. Sorry?
People are nodding.
Well, I mean, take Snapchat. Why is Snapchat so popular, you know? Because it deletes the data or something.
But I'm not sure that people, sorry to just wade in, this is kind of
No,
but I'm not sure
that indiscipline under there.
sorry for being disciplined. I mean, is there a bit of a difference between not wanting the kind of hassle of certain people knowing what you're up to tomorrow, where the people you envisage are your parents or your friends or your enemies locally, on the one hand, and on the other, a much more nebulous, smart algorithm that's going to work out how to sell you something or whatever? I don't know. I asked the question, is there? I mean, in other words, is the first what's driving the desire for privacy and not the more sophisticated view about where this is going to leave you in 5 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I can't really claim to, I can't claim that, you know, 16-year-olds are thinking all the time about where they're going to. No, about 5 years' time. I mean, this just doesn't go with the territory, really. The question of algorithms and biased algorithms is, yeah, I mean, I think there it's got to, in part, come down to kind of public scrutiny and also government scrutiny. I mean, people are, I mean, it's very early days. There's quite little use of machine learning in the British state, for example, in British government, for example. But where in the US, where it has been used quite a lot, there's an organisation called ProPublica of journalists which have taken it upon themselves. They are scrutinising algorithms right across states. Every time they do it, they find that it's never been scrutinised before, it's not been audited. And they're finding all sorts of examples of bias. Now, a lot of those biases are not because the agencies that are using them want to be biased. It's because they don't know. It's because they've signed a contract with an IT supplier who has, come up with a biased algorithm. And I think that's very valuable work, and that has to go on, and we have to work out a way of building into contracts a sort of outcome measure, not a process thing, but an outcome thing. Is it biased? Can it be demonstrated that it's not biased? But sorry, I know you want to come in, but there's just one other point I wanted to make here, which I think is really important. A lot of this, and this is good news for any social scientists in the audience, a lot of this depends on some kind of social science understanding in being able to sort of deal with these issues. And that's precisely what these organisations that are building them don't have. And I think that's something that's got to be tackled as well. We train our STEM researchers, we train our physicists as if they're going to be astrophysicists. We train our engineers as if they're going to build bridges. By far the majority of those people are going to go and work in places like Facebook and Google and basically do social science. And it will be bad social science because they've had no social science training. Apologies to any engineers among you. I mean, engineering is obviously, is at the bedrock of this platform. But I think we have to think about a more multidisciplinary sort of training if that's what people are going to go and do. And that will be the ultimate answer to having less bias in machine learning.
So, down first, then back there. So, the microphones. It's especially important for people at the front to have a microphone. Because they tend to talk very quietly.
Just quickly on bias in machine learning, I think part of the problem is that actually the people who write these things don't know how they work. Because it is machine learning, they kind of write themselves, and they're really very difficult to understand how they work. But there's also the problem kind of, with all this data out there, do we really understand how it can be used as a weapon against you? I know Cambridge Analytica claimed to have cracked it, or at least they told some people they cracked it.
That's pretty interesting. Should we take a few what you think about it? So, right there.
Oh, yeah, that works, yeah. My question is a bit of a theoretical one. Since you mentioned that it's a role of social scientists to really get to the bottom of this, I want to ask a question that I think is important for understanding this in a sociological way. I'm basically wondering, do you believe that ICTs enhance pre-existing structures, or do you believe that they have the power to reconstruct them? Because there seems to be kind of two narratives at play here. One that's a bit more like technologically deterministic, which states that ICTs, for example, they can provide more people with the ability to look for employment, so therefore it's a positive thing. And then there's a more technological, a skeptic view that says, well, you can be discriminated against in the same ways that you would do in real life. So my question is basically, do ICTs, information communication technologies, do they enhance human traits, or do they actually transform them?
That's kind of the ultimate question. Bonnie, give me a second to think about a short answer to a big question.
My business, sorry, I very much enjoyed your talk. My business is news, 40 years in journalism, print, radio and TV. And I wonder if historically this period of the internet is really any different from any other period of history in terms of how we get and receive news. Because you mentioned Donald Trump's tweets. Well, people have always gone in search of news. You've had town criers in the market square, you've had royal decrees that actually there's a lot of hype about the internet age, but news has always been here. Echo chambers have always been here. Your local pub is an echo chamber. Your local parish church is an echo chamber. So all the while that I'm hearing you speak, I'm thinking, well, how does this equate to another period of history? Are we not perhaps getting a little too hot under the collar about the internet?
Okay, so obscurity of the algorithms, the ultimate question about human nature, and we've heard it all before, right?
It's not quite
We've got a few minutes to answer.
We're just saying news has always been with
News
us.
always, that's right.
Yeah, I think we are getting hot under the collar.
You think we are?
Well, about a lot of these pathologies.
Yeah,
I mean,
too.
I do basically.
I do as
And
well.
if anybody, I mean, I've just written an article for Open Democracy because I was invited to contribute to the Council of Europe Democracy Forum or something. And they published 35 articles on sort of democracy and social media of such unremitting gloom and misery. I felt so cross that I wrote something saying they were quite hot under the collar. Anyway, so I do agree with that, but I think there's something here which is important, and it relates in part to your question, which is that this is the first technology we've ever had that citizens have domesticated with and are innovating with faster than governments. And no other technology, not the personal computer, no other information technology has done that, where citizens are generating things themselves. Even the tiny apps are generating something, and that is what's new to me, and I think it's important, and it's part of the reason why we don't quite know what will happen, because they are involved in it. People are involved in this themselves, in creating the news, as it were, or magnifying the news.
Didn't the scribes, weren't they involved in writing the Bible?
They were, but there weren't very many of them. They were an elite. But 4 million people signing a petition or something like that. It's gone beyond.
So
it
it's
has
the
gone
numbers,
beyond the elite. It is in part the numbers, but I don't think we've ever seen that with an information technology before. Your question about I wasn't totally sure that I understood your question. I mean, are organisations different? I think that's a very important point, actually, and I was thinking about this when discussing the biased algorithms with ProPublica, because, okay, so you've got, maybe you've got a judge making sentencing decisions based on an algorithm that they don't really understand, based on training data that is itself biased, and that's an important point. For something like sentencing, machine learning works by, just in case anybody doesn't know, machine learning works by kind of picking up patterns, looking at data, picking up patterns in the data, and kind of working out what's happening or trends or associations within that data just from the data, without a pre-existing theory. Now, it needs data to train on it, and think about finding sentencing data, for example, that's not biased. And why is it biased? Well, because an awful lot of judges are biased. And with the judges, you can't sort of send them back if you don't... I mean, do you see what I mean? I mean, at least it does, in a way, kind of highlight bias, which might be a point of optimism for the future, that the kind of bias that has always been there can now, to some extent, be scrutinised. And of course, you made the very valid point that in some ways it can't be, because it's got a life of its own. The people who who design computational propaganda, they are out of control of it. And in fact, I do know one German political scientist who was asked in the last German election by Merkel's office to write a bot, an automated account, to counter Russian propaganda because they were so worried about it. And he said, very ethical guy, he said, well, no, I won't do it, because I wouldn't have control over it. So there's quite an important sort of philosophical point there. You know, and it's interesting to think what you would do in that situation. Would you do it or not? Because there was a very famous example by Microsoft, probably did it here, to develop the Taybot, which was supposed to sort of go around policing offensive behaviour on the internet. But the trouble is, it became extremely offensive itself because it was learning from the company it was keeping and ended up
It is
spewing
race war now.
yeah, vile, racist, abusive language. So you've got some real problems there. I mean, I think we get a bit hot under the collar about those things too, because there are. I mean, these are, you know, it's like the old saying about the Wright brothers' first aeroplane. I mean, you know, you wouldn't have wanted to go in it, but it doesn't mean it wasn't a good idea. And this is a good idea. The sort of counter-bot thing is a good idea, and there are now some successes with those things where they are tackling identifying and tackling racist behaviour.
There's one more here which I missed. Oh yes, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, first of all. So you framed regulation as a kind of solution to the driving of inequality on digital platforms. Like, that was basically the bottom line, if I understood you correctly.
One possible
way, okay. So,
yeah,
no, sorry. I didn't mean to.
I'm in trouble back home.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Right, but my question is, if we view these platforms through the lens of technological affordances and kind of the nudge design that happens on these platforms, can they actually ever really allow for free political expression? And to what end would we actually have to regulate them to say political action that occurs through this platform is entirely genuine and legitimate?
I think it's very difficult, and you're probably aware of what has happened in Germany, where there is a new act to treat every platform as a publisher, which some people want here. I gave evidence to a House of Lords committee a couple of weeks ago, and Anora O'Neill has got a private bill, you know, with that. I think that's completely impossible. You know, it's unimaginable that you're going to be able to kind of, you know, Facebook is not going to start policing its 2 billion users in terms of everything they put there. So there's lots of things I think kind of can't be done, and they just can't be policed. Because so much of what goes on online, after all, is already illegal. You know, I mean, death threats and rape threats and things like that. You get social media being blamed for them, but I mean, they're illegal already. You know, it's a question of actually doing something about it. And Twitter finally is doing something about it, but it wasn't for ages in this shameful, totally shameful way. Can you regulate algorithms which decide, well, some people have argued that you should, you know, with the whole echo chamber thing. I mean, it wouldn't be something, it's going to be messy. It's always going to be messy and impartial and sort of incremental and kind of, it'll always be that they'll always be kicking and screaming, the platforms, particularly when it comes to the sort of their broad kind of social, you know, their core business. As I said, politics is a bit of a sort of side issue. For them. But yeah, I mean, I do believe that it has to be possible to still have an electoral commission that can scrutinise political advertising. I mean, I think political advertising, I think we're, you know, I think a lot of the discussion of Cambridge Analytica has got really stupid. I think you know, the vast majority of what they have claimed and what people have claimed for them is, you know, smoke and mirrors. But political advertising, targeted political advertising is a real, you know, that is a tough nut to crack, but I do believe that it can be tackled, that it is possible, but it's not going to be easy.
Largely citizen action and lots of actions by people.
Well, everything, you know, it's got to be a completely multiple layered approach, and it's got to be. One of the problems we have here is it's a different way of thinking about things. I mean, because it won't, you know, sometimes it will be a matter of examining the outputs, as it were, not the process. Because the process, as a couple of people have pointed out, can't really be examined. It's a question of looking at and that's what we've got to think about.
So let's move back to this. Oh, yes, there's one. Okay.
Thanks very much. Yeah, one of the key arguments of the Equality Trust is that status competition is actually quite detrimental to us, and so that the more status competition that you get, the more stress and social anxiety people feel, and that can be very serious. So in countries with higher inequality, you get more status competition and more stress and results in all sorts of social problems. I'm just interested in thinking about to what extent social media might exacerbate status competition. For example, in kind of growing rates of mental illness among young people, and if so, what can we do about it?
Yeah, this is another area where the social media has really been blamed for literally everything that goes wrong with young people's mental states today. And you know, it's a hard one. There has been some recent research suggesting that, you know, yeah, there's a recent journal article, I think I tweeted it, 99.99% of young girls' mental health problems are not due to social media. I mean, you know, but I mean, I take what you're saying, of course, and you do notice that with young people, of course, that kind of how many people they've got following them and so on. If that's what you mean. You mean their image on social media. But I mean, it's quite difficult to disentangle it from the kind of who's the most, you know, who are the cool people, who are the popular people. In a way, it gives young people, to me, it gives young people the possibility of kind of being the cool person in some setting. I mean, cyberbullying, of course, is a thing, and bullying always has been a thing. And I think perhaps the most worrying development, well, I mean, that's not quite your question, but there are some newer platforms geared at very young children based on kind of music and kind of products, which are very, you know, are very kind of insecure and not subject to any sort of regulation at all. But the status anxiety, I mean, I think perhaps of most relevance to this conversation is the kind of, I think, the two things, the fear of missing out, that is a very real phenomenon. You know, that everybody else is kind of having a nicer time than you. And that is an established phenomenon on social media platforms. And also then I think awareness of inequality. I mean, there's a lot of research that shows that awareness of inequality leads to more kind of risky behaviour. And I've just seen a very interesting paper on that. There's a conference at the Turing Institute at the moment. And I think we are more aware of inequality than we used to be, and I think social media is implicated in that. That just other people have more stuff. I mean, of course, that is the attraction, though. I mean, when you look at the phenomenon of micro-influencers on Instagram, the sort of charm of it to the users of Instagram is that they're kind of ordinary people, and it could almost be them. So you do have mitigating factors there, but I guess, yeah, that awareness of inequality in terms of, for example, that some people have so many friends and contacts and so many kind of lovely holidays and nice drinks and everything. I think that is an important point.
Well, thanks. That's a perfect encapsulation of both the positive and the negative. And who knows, that awareness might cause some social change as opposed to just causing distress. But thanks very much, Helen. That was a fascinating talk and a tremendous addition to our series. Thank you.